Now we are ready to ask this important question. What is it we want our students to care about? Not just for one class, but as values we wish for them to uphold as dancers. In other words, what do we want to teach our students that helps them form a mental representation that will serve them as an effective compass for their continuous development as dancers and that best serves the dance as a whole? Now, imagine having students that always feel aligned with you. Each time you introduce a new concept, they feel excited because it's exactly what they have been waiting for. You make progress a lot faster and it's more enjoyable because your students are collaborating with you and are eager to learn what you have to share. Conversely, if you find yourself having to convince your students with statements that suggest that they should trust your judgment rather than just being aligned with you, teaching becomes an uphill battle. An important component of our mental representation of the dance is that it contains our worldview of the dance, meaning it is telling us what the dance is and is not. Where are its boundaries? How should one go about learning it? What's important to learn? And so on. To have a practical way of thinking about how we are contributing to our students' worldview of the dance, we like to introduce what we call the box concept. As humans, whenever we choose to interact with a new experience, we allow our minds to be a little bit more open towards that experience. We haven't yet formed strong opinions about it. For example, the decision of whether we like it or not, what's right, what's wrong, and if it works for us or not. You can imagine this process as though we create a box in our mind for this new experience. While having the experience, we start putting information inside of that box. The information we put into this box contains everything about it. The skills we are learning, the facts about it, the values and opinions we are developing. In other words, the box contains the whole worldview we are creating about the experience. Now, after some time spent engaging with this experience, we feel the need to figuratively closing the lid of the box. This gives us the feeling of having understood or made up our mind about what it is we are engaging with. It's an important part of the process because while the lid is open, we spend a lot of energy on being hyper-aware and sensitive to information around us, which can cause anxiety and stress. Also, closing the lid means that we feel more confident about our decision to invest in this experience. It doesn't mean we think we have mastered everything within it and that we know everything. Rather, it means that we've collected the information we need in order to answer questions like, does it fit into the way we think about how the world works? Or how do I have to behave to feel safe and appreciated here? Do I want to be a part of it? Does this inspire me? What is it I'm expecting to get, learn, or feel from this experience? How do I think I will have to behave to be successful here? As this box sits inside of our mental representation of the experience, some of it we'll be able to articulate. In other words, to make a mental model around it. And some of it we can't verbalize, but rather just feel intuitively. Either way, our wants, opinions, actions, and decisions are all shaped by it. As teachers, what's also very important to understand is that inside of this box is also an unspoken agreement on what the experience should be all about. To illustrate how this affects our ability to teach, let's introduce an example. Let's look at an experience a beginner student might have. For context, consider the first 3 months of a student who comes to learn a dance for one class a week. Now, let's assume that they have not yet formed strong opinions about what the dance is. Their box towards the experience of learning the dance is still wide open. In this period, they are receptive to forming beliefs about what it is they should and should not care about. Now, we say 3 months very deliberately because we've learned from years of teaching beginners and observing them closely that it is around this time most students start using very definitive words, labels, and opinions on what it is they think they need from us as their teachers. The experience they've had with us so far sets up patterns of expectation, which is the unspoken agreement. Through this agreement, an expectation is established about what the ongoing learning experience should be like. When your students decide to continue taking lessons from you, they've made this decision according to the experience established from the experience they've already had with you. In other words, they want a continuation of what they think they need in order to improve. They want clarity of their mental representation and already have their own notion of what needs to be worked on. This is why, if you try to deviate from that notion, even if you think you know better, they might not follow you. Rather, they will ask you to modify what you teach and how you teach it in order to help them learn what they think they need. This experience can easily leave us frustrated, but we shouldn't fall prey to the temptation of blaming our students for this situation. Sadly, as teachers, we've created this problem ourselves. And as the saying goes, we made our own bed, now we must lie in it. Conversely, if we can set our classes up from the beginning in such a way that the unspoken agreement we make is aligned with the way we want to continue, we'll find that a lot of our issues with difficult students and other frustrations we've experienced in the past simply will vanish. I want to share an example from Lindy Hop. In Lindy Hop, one common approach to teach the dance is to separate moves in two categories, the 8-count patterns and the 6-count patterns. And then to teach only one pattern at a time, often alternating between these patterns every month or two. One reason for this approach is that students who come to Lindy Hop classes are often primary hobby dancers who are looking for something fun after a long day of work. So teachers try to keep the difficulty level low and give them the time to learn a pattern over a full month. The challenge, however, is that most of these teachers have a worldview of the dance in which the patterns are very flexible. The creative expressions of rhythm is more important, and the most common patterns they are teaching their students are simply one out of many ways of expressing these rhythms. Meanwhile, when a student has gone through a few months of learning with this fixed pattern approach, they've formed a worldview or a mental representation of the dance that is very different from that of their teachers. In their box, the idea of fixed pattern has got so much of the space, while pattern-free expressions of rhythm didn't get much attention at all. The moment the teacher wants to introduce their values by breaking away from the fixed patterns or mix between them within a dance, the students will emotionally struggle a lot and perhaps even resist the teachers because what the teachers are asking for no longer matches the agreement they've made from their perspective. We can of course ask ourselves, how do we influence students who've already closed the lid to their boxes? Is it possible to even change someone's worldview of a dance once they've closed the lid to the box? And the answer is yes, we can, but depending on how much we've deviated from what's already in the box, we need to design a much more intense experience in order for them to willingly open their box again. For example, a weekend of an intensive workshop experience with someone they trust and look up to can have this effect. We've done a lot of work in this domain, and from our experience, we've seen the best result when we had the opportunity to create an environment where students not only felt safe to open their box, but crucially, we've also had enough time to help them close it again before they leave. You see, the process of reopening a closed box is emotionally very taxing. It creates chaos in a domain where we thought we had things figured out. It makes us feel insecure about everything we previously thought we know about it. This feeling of self-doubt can be crippling and makes us hesitate at every step. Maybe you experienced this for yourself after working with a mentor who helped you see a complete different approach to the dance, and now you feel you need to relearn everything you know from this new perspective in mind. You might have noticed that even things you used to feel confident and good about are suddenly inducing a lot of hesitation and stress. The confidence you might have had teaching might be shaken because now all explanations, examples, and models you used to teach might no longer be valid from this new perspective. Now, as an experienced dancer with a goal of self-actualization, you might find enough motivation to push through this. But then, imagine a hobby dancer who are just looking for fun and don't have the same internal drive as you do. How do you inspire them to do this work? That is what makes it so difficult to change a person's worldview of the dance. Sometimes, a person struggles so much with the idea of opening the lid to the box that they rather form a new box separate from the original one. This means that although they are open to the learning experience, they have categorized this new knowledge and skill as something that is not really part of the dance they know. In their minds, they are now learning two different dances and actively have to choose in which world they are operating in. This is why, in our opinion, instead of planning your classes in terms of what concepts, techniques, and moves we think our students can handle, the primary decision-making process for the class design needs to be based on this question. What structures, explained with what examples and models, need to be shared in order to form what we want our students to care about? Meaning, what are the agreements you are making with your students? And ideally, as much as possible, how can these agreements be brought to the surface and made explicit? This is just as important when teaching small taster classes at a party, your beginner classes, or classes for your more experienced dancers. In fact, let's go into more details about taster classes versus ongoing classes. We think this can illuminate a lot of the details about what agreements we are making with our students. This is because we see so many teachers make the mistake of offering taster classes in a way that it acts very much like a bait and switch tactic. This creates an experience in the taster class setting that is significantly different from the experience they know their students will have once committed to a longer program. Now, we don't believe this comes from a purposeful manipulation. Rather, it comes from recognizing that these two settings serve very different purposes, but not managing that differences holistically. A taster class might be intended to give a light introduction to the dance, provide some fun variety in the evening's entertainment, bringing people together in a common activity, or many other reasons like that. Meanwhile, an ongoing weekly lesson can also have various objectives. It might just be a light engagement to break up the daily monotony with something fun, or it might have more ambitious learning goals. We believe it's correct to adapt to each situation differently. However, we recommend that you start your planning with a bigger picture in mind. You'll be able to get the best of both worlds. You'll be able to set expectations that will serve you long term, while still adapting to each of the circumstances. In short, start by deciding what are the values you want your participants to experience. If it is a value, it will, or should, if done right, be expressed across all your experiences. You'll also want to decide on the depth into which you want to go for each of these values. Now, this will be the topic of lecture 7, so here I will just say that in the planning stage is about how much time you wish to spend on each value. From there, you can move on to decide what combination of concrete movements you want to put together for that particular class. So, to illustrate how this can work, we want to highlight a few aspects of our own taster classes and how we've changed them over time. One of the most recognizable features of our classes is that we want our students to spend most of their time dancing and very little time listening to us talk. That means in any experience with us, whether it's a 20-minute taster at an outdoor event that's geared to non-dancers or a weekend intensive workshop to our most experienced students will spend most of the class dancing independently to music. This has been the case for our classes for a long time, and we don't expect that to change. Something that has changed in our classes is how much we focus on building a physical skill versus how much we focus on culture. If you had joined a taster class with us some years ago, you would have been sure to include several moments of focus on quite specific physical practice. We did this because we knew that this type of focus of physical skill would be a frequent feature of our regular classes as well. Nowadays, we might have such moments in a taster class, or we might not, because our priorities in the dance have developed further. If you would join a taster class with us next week, you would notice how high a priority is put on experimentations and freedom of self-expression. Again, this is because we know that this freedom will be an important feature if you would continue with our regular classes. Having said all that, some aspects of any given experience with us might be different from our usual classes, either due to circumstances beyond our control, for example, lots of distractions in an outdoor public taster class, or because of a particular choice we made. In that case, we want to take special care to communicate this clearly with our students. In our case, for the past few years, all our beginner Lindy Hop workshops have been based on the everybody lead, everybody follow concept. This means that students don't sign up with a specific dance role as a leader or a follower, and instead experience both during the workshop. However, our regular 6-week courses do have fixed dance roles, so towards the end of the workshop, we explain both why we chose to apply the ELF concept for the workshop and how that will be different in the weekly courses we hope they'll sign up for. Actually, I'm going to take this opportunity to do the same thing with this video series you're watching right now. As this is a video platform, clearly we need to present this teaching framework as a video. Now, we hope you'll explore our full teachers training program on our website, and when you do, you'll notice that we use a lot more text, audio, and images as the primary medium and sprinkle videos here and there for extra clarity. This multimedia approach, combined with the live sessions we offer regularly, is a formula that works really well, and hopefully you check it out so we also get to meet in person, well, online of course. Now, if you take one thing from this lecture, it is this. As you design your classes, you want to think about the unspoken agreement you're forming with your students. The challenge here is to surface these agreements so that you can notice them and make them clear spoken agreements. However, it is very difficult to turn all aspects of a student's exposure to the experience spoken. There will always be unspoken elements that we are not aware of. But over time, more and more of these will come to your attention if you look for them. And then you can consciously include them into your students' early experiences in a way that you believe will best serve them. As a side note, when you design your classes with this in mind, you'll also notice that each new generation of students who learn from you will align with your values better, and thus you'll probably even notice that someone who just recently started dancing with you might excel past your more experienced students fairly quickly, because you've gotten better in helping your students build a worldview that is more effective for their learning, whilst the previous generation of students now need to go through the difficult process of reopening their boxes in order for them to make the worldview more effective for their learning. Over time, if you pay attention to the worldview your students are forming, you'll find more and more of these unspoken agreements because they are not so easy to surface, especially when you're not looking for them. When we coach teachers, we often go through a process where we try to better understand their values and what they want their students to care about. Then we go over their teaching plans and what they actually do in class. When we look at these side by side, it often jumps out rather quickly that the values they're saying is important and the content they've selected for the classes rarely match. At least in Lindy Hop, a lot of people have the values of creativity, feeling connected to the music, and having playful interactions with their partners. However, when we look at their teaching plans, these are often not to be seen in their classes. The teachers have filled their plans with the moves they want their students to learn, thinking that they can only get to those higher values once their students have the right amount of material that they can use for it. But now, you know that this approach will not work, because if they wait for weeks and months before introducing those higher level values, these values won't make it into their students' box and thus won't be part of the worldview. So when they now try to introduce these values at a later stage, they're met with a lot of pushback from the students who have strong wishes to go back to what they're used to. Note that not just the moves and concepts introduced in your classes, but the whole experience is affected by this concept of forming a worldview. For example, you might want to build a community where people are less focused on the level of the dance and want people to interact and dance with each other openly across the different experience levels. But all your classes are strictly defined levels, and perhaps what your students have understood as a requirement to join a certain level is their ability to execute specific list of moves. Again, here we have communicated what the students should work towards, even if it doesn't match what we value and want them to carry into their worldview. Another common situation is when we have the value that our students should find their own voices as dancers, but we correct them and devalue their performances whenever it deviates from our own standards and models. Now, this is a great challenge we face when it comes to helping your students form a worldview that can act as an effective compass for their ongoing development. It is formed from their entire experience engaging with the dance, and much of it is within the context of our class, but some of it is also in the interactions they are having with each other and other experiences they are having in general. So again, how do we put in everything we want our students to care about inside of the few interactions we have with them? And that is going to be the topic of the next lecture, where we will walk you through the 8 different depths of learning that we use when planning our classes. These gives us a much clearer understanding of how much time we will spend on each topic and how to communicate what is expected of our students so that we can better decide what should make it into their experience and what we can leave out. And when you feel ready, join me there.